Hey everybody, I am back with my review of episode 4 of Star Trek Starfleet Academy. This episode follows along with Jaden Cragg, and we kind of get to know more of his background, set up through kind of a debate of what to do with the Klingon Empire since the burn. There's a issue where there's kind of a refugee flight of Klingons with the remaining houses of the Klingon Empire on it, and there's a catastrophe of some sort that threatens to basically wipe out all the remaining houses. And this is framed through them just kind of, since the burn, refusing any kind of tie to Starfleet. Now, I really like the character of Jaden Cragg. I like the idea of following this kind of pacifist Klingon. But I felt like this episode really had highs and lows, but, was just kind of a mid episode comparative to the last couple episodes, which were very strong, very entertaining. This one had elements I just didn't really care for. One of the things is it's more of a nerdy aspect, but when they would do the flashbacks as to what was going on with Jaden and his family in this lead up to wanting to go to Starfleet, and a lot of those flashback scenes are filmed in this kind of herky-jerky way that I just find visually unappealing. And so that sort of rubbed me the wrong way. There is a scene that just kind of comes out of nowhere, where Cragg is, struggling with almost like, these kind of anxiety attacks because he's just doesn't, has trouble speaking publicly. Because he is, like I said, he's this kind of pacifist Klingon. And, there's a scene that comes out of nowhere where Raimi shows up and they have this very kind of intimate scene where he's trying to get Jaden to kind of recite this kind of Klingon mantra to kind of get over his anxiety. And it's done in such a way that I half expected them to kiss at the end. And I'm really hoping they don't go that direction with Jaden's character, because to me it's a little on the nose. He's already, othered in Klingon society because he is a pacifist. So then if they go all the way over, to me it's just a little too on the nose. That the pacifist Klingon would also be gay, which I wouldn't have a problem if he was like, a traditional Klingon warrior who just also happened to be gay. Like, to me, that would be more interesting than going almost all the way to the point of stereotype of having him be this pacifist bird watching, Klingon, and then make him also gay. Like, to me, that's a little on the nose, a little almost insultingly stereotypical. You know, so and the other, I don't know if I would like that direction, but also I just didn't like the fact that it just kind of comes out of nowhere. You know, uh, that scene, like it just kind of threw me for a loop when it happened. It was just kind of like, okay, well, this is kind of out of nowhere. There's no real setup to it. I felt like maybe I missed an episode somewhere in there that showed any kind of developing anything between Raimi and Jaden. And maybe at that point I would have, if there had been more setup, if there had been something there that would have, made me just kind of see like, oh, okay, there is this building of this, kind of friendship, relationship kind of thing between Raimi and Jaden, but you don't see it. So it does just kind of come out of nowhere. Um, you know, I did like the way that Laura Thuck stepped in to kind of help Jaden with this kind of, emotional crisis that he was going through as kind of a, kind of Klingon elder to him, since she's um, part Klingon, part Jem'Hadar, and was able to kind of use that background to kind of reel Jaden in, as from that kind of existential crisis he was having. I did like that scene. I thought that scene worked really well. I thought, there's a lot there to like. I thought, some of those the debate scenes I thought were good and entertaining and had, some light humor to them. Um, but I think that in a show so geared around the ensemble, that I think this show, when it veers off to really just kind of lock in on one character and one character alone, I do think that that is where this show is kind of at its weakest. Um, I think the show works best when it really kind of encompasses, you know, in a way, kind of what the original Star Trek did. It was this big ensemble, and, you know, if it was going to, shrink down, some of the best Star Trek, when it decided to lock in and really kind of lock in on somebody's, character, it followed more that kind of relationship of, Kirk, Bones, and Spock, and their friendship, and that core friendship there. Some of the best stuff in Star Trek from a character perspective. Um, so even if you're focusing on, say, something, in Kirk, like you look at Wrath of Khan, where like a lot of it has to do with Kirk, accepting old age, kind of, being forced to confront mortality. A lot of the best parts of that is how it's dealt with in, between him and Spock and Bones, and, then the introduction of David into the mix, and Carol Marcus. And, there's more to it there than just kind of following one guy dealing with his kind of existential crisis. Um, so, I think that the stuff there to like is, the kind of debate stuff towards the beginning. There's some little bits of humor there. That's great. I think the stuff where it delves into kind of what's going on with the Klingon Empire and Starfleet trying to help them, but them refusing help, and um, having, you know, um, Holly Hunter's character have to kind of, basically kind of alludes to kind of an old Klingon flame who's kind of the head Klingon right now, and kind of, kind of working out this swerve to get the rest of the Klingons to accept this planet that is very much like Kronos. Um, get them to, accept it, even though it's Starfleet offering it technically, but kind of tricking them to be like, nope, 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 we got this in battle, kind of thing. And I really liked that. And of course, anytime I get to hear Jerry Goldsmith's Klingon theme is always welcome. I think one of the things with these shows, and I've talked about this in some of my Star Wars videos, one of the biggest things that I think a lot of these shows really screw up is the way that they run screaming from these classic old themes and music. And I think that a lot of these shows would do well to remember that part of the appeal of these shows is the nostalgia factor. You may not like the idea of trying to, it's not, I hesitate to say catering to nostalgia, but I think sometimes just those little things, a little design element, a music cue, goes a long way towards helping the overall look and feel of a new project in these big franchises. You know, I think that, DC would do well to do more adopting of these classic themes. When Batman shows up, use Elfman's Batman theme. It's a theme that screams Batman. If you're doing Star Wars, dipping your toe into some of the John Williams cues. And of course, with Star Trek, you have this breadth of music that you can pull from that people really latch on to, whether it's some of the themes from even shows like Enterprise, but especially the Jerry Goldsmith stuff and the James Horner stuff from the movies. I mean, especially has a strong pull to a lot of people that I really think would do well in some of these shows to really lock in the feel of Star Trek. So, it was nice to see them actually go there and be like, here's the Klingon thing, as the Klingons show up. So that was a really hype moment where you're just kind of like, oh, hell yeah, this is awesome. So it's a show that, I think the episode started strong, ended strong, has just kind of a rough middle. So all in all, I would probably give this episode a 2.5 out of 5. It's fine. It's strong opening, strong finish, definitely helped the episode. But the middle just kind of loses itself and has some really obnoxious filmmaking stuff from the way the flashbacks are shot. That kind of out of nowhere scene with Raimi and Jay Den, and the way it's shot, to me just didn't work. I think there's better ways to handle that, and I think there's better ways you can explore the idea of potentially a gay Klingon in different ways that doesn't go with something so on the nose that it's the pacifist Klingon is gay. Like, I think there's other better ways you can explore those themes and characterizations other than to almost kind of go into stereotype mode of like, oh, here he is, the pacifist bird watcher. I think there's more interesting ways to go if you just make him a traditional aggro, just kind of, warrior Klingon. I think is more interesting than going that route if that's where they're going with it, which it's hard not to imagine because that scene was so on the nose. Like I said, you're watching that scene and you are like, okay, it's like holding up the two dolls. Okay, now you two kiss. I mean, that's how that that scene was shot almost. So I think there's definitely some better ways they could go about that. That's more interesting. So we'll see where that goes. But like I said, it's an entertaining episode, but definitely flawed. And like I said, if you watch it, I imagine you're gonna like the opening and you're gonna like the ending. And that middle chunk there is very like highest of highs, lowest of lows, which really takes away from the overall quality of the episode. So let me know what you think in the comments below, and I will see you in the next video.